In this video, you will learn about multiplication properties. Now, before we get to the properties, let's talk a bit about multiplication. Now, first off, remember multiplication, the purpose is to quickly calculate the repeated addition of numbers. So, for example, let's say we're adding 5 4s together, so 4 plus 4 plus 4 plus 4 plus 4. We know that would equal 20. Now, multiplication is a quicker way of performing that same operation. So we see here there are 5 4s that we are adding together. So we can write that as 5 times 4 because we have 5 4s, and that would equal 20. All right, so an application of this, here's an example where there are 5 teams with 4 people on each team. And the question is, how many people are there in total? Well, there's 5 teams, each one has 4 people. So we can take 5, multiply it by 4, and that would give you 20. So it's a shortcut way of figuring out a sum of people, or sum of anything. All right, so that is multiplication. And with multiplication, there's different parts of a multiplication problem. Let's say, for example, we were multiplying 3 times 7. Well, we know that would be 21, but the 3 and the 7 both are called factors. So the numbers you're multiplying together are called factors, and the answer is called the product. And when you're multiplying, there's different ways we can express multiplication. We have your typical times sign, which is like a X, capital X. So that is a typical way of writing multiplication, but we also have other ways of expressing it. We could use a raised dot, so a little dot in the middle. So it's not a decimal, but it's like halfway, kind of like the middle of 4 and 5. All right, so it's halfway up and down. It's a raised dot. That's one way of expressing multiplication. We could put a parentheses around one of the numbers, so like 4 parentheses 5. Or we could put parentheses around the first number, or parentheses around both numbers. All of these are ways to express multiplication. And as you progress in your study of math, the second one here with the raised dot is used very often because we're going to start throwing in letters instead of numbers. So it's not for a little while, but eventually you'll get to that point, and the time sign looks a lot like an X. So it can be confusing once we start throwing letters in our problems. Now let's talk about the properties of multiplication. The properties of multiplication are very similar to the properties of addition, and many of these properties are the same. The first one is the commutative property, which we also had for addition. So for addition, we learned that the commutative property said that we could switch the order of the numbers when adding. Same thing with multiplication. This property says that the order of the multiplication does not make a difference. So in math notation, we can say A times B equals B times A. The numbers that we are multiplying can change. So the order of the numbers can change. So for example, if we had 5 times 4, that is the same thing as 4 times 5. The order in which we multiply does not make a difference. So that is your commutative property. Next we have the associative property, and this one as well we saw with the addition properties. And in English, we can say that the grouping of the factors when multiplying does not make a difference. So for example, if you had 3 numbers multiplied together, we'll call it A, B, and C. It doesn't matter if you group together A and B and multiply those first, or if you multiply B and C first and then multiply A at the end. So it doesn't matter the order or the way in which we group together the numbers. With actual numbers, here we have 3 times 4 times 5. So notice on the left side over here, we have 3 times 4 grouped together. So it's grouped in the parentheses. So it doesn't matter if we do that first to get 12 and then multiply by 5, which would give you 60, or if you group together the 4 and the 5, multiply that together first to get 20, and then 3 times 20 would also equal 60. So notice we have the same answer no matter which way we do it. So again, the associative property says the grouping of the factors does not make a difference. Our third property for multiplication is your identity property. So we had an identity property for addition, and the idea, the concept of this is pretty much the same as with addition. So the identity property says that if you start with a number, let's say we start with 8, for example, this property says that we can multiply by some number without changing the identity or the value of the original number. And that number for multiplication is the number 1. So the identity property for multiplication says that multiplying by 1 does not change the original value. In math notation, we can replace the number 8 with a letter, and we'll use the letter A. And it says in math notation, A times 1 equals A. It doesn't matter what A is. A could be 8, A could be 10, doesn't matter. But when you multiply by 1, we have the same number that we started with. Another property is the zero property. And this property says that anything times 0 will always equal 0. So in math notation, we can say A times 0 equals 0. With an actual number put in there, we can say something like 8 times 0 equals 0, or 100 times 0 equals 0. Whatever you multiply by 0, it doesn't matter because the answer will always equal 0. And that concludes our lesson for today. We will see you next time.